Welcome, mortals, to the Beautiful Dead podcast. If you've come to this channel, you should stay for several reasons. One, you love vampires. This is a vampire podcast where we break down movies, TV shows, and books about vampires. We talk about the universe that's been created, how are they made, what rules do they have to follow, and more. Every once in a while, like October, I set aside the fiction and talk about all things vampire. 2, you have a podcast or would like to have a podcast and want to see behind the scenes of recording one. I edit out very little, so you will get to see mistakes and interruptions and learn along with me. Or 3, you're a fan of the podcast and you just want to watch me record it live. Or you like my books and you can't get enough of me. So, if you're still here, I promise it's due to your own free will, and I have not used my powers to keep you here. Now, watch the title cards and listen to the music along with the podcast. I'm gonna go get a bite, and I'll meet you back here, nice and full.
Hello? Really?
Vampire! We take your candy!
Count Dracula.
I am Dracula. And I bid you welcome, Mr. Hunt, to my house. Come.
Our first award goes to the vampire for most blood drained in a single evening.
The strength of the vampire is that people will not believe in him.
Good evening, my fellow vampire lovers. The sun is going down, and you know what that means. It's time for me to record another episode of my podcast, The Beautiful Dead. As always, I'm your host, Lena, and you know what? It's not just another episode. It is the season 3 finale of the podcast. Now, for those of you watching on YouTube, this is only my first year of doing it on YouTube, so I guess it's the first season on YouTube, but it is the 3rd season of the Beautiful Dead podcast, and I still cannot wrap my brain around that. We are wrapping up 2023, and what a wild year it has been. Looking back, I have published my 3rd book. I've gotten on YouTube. I've traveled to some pretty wonderful places and done some pretty amazing cons, met some amazing people, started doing my vampire panel at cons, which is so much fun, and I'm so grateful for this whole thing. I have such exciting plans for 2024, so I really, really hope you're gonna come back, which it looks like it's gonna be January 7th. So I'm not taking much of a break at all. I'm coming back January 7th, starting season 4 with the episode we all know I like to start the year with, which is what to expect for vampire material in that year. And I'll be sharing all of my plans for 2024. So please, I hope you will come back. If you want more of me, go to lenanazeri.com. You can see links to my social media. You can join my Fanged family and get updates about the books and places I will be. Or you can take a step up in 2024 and join my street team. These are the people who are out there talking about the podcast. I had somebody amazing, shout out to Trav, who made a shirt that he wore at Monster Mania. There are people who are posting, there are people making artwork, and they get postcards from me and swag and things like that. So join my street team. It's a good group of people, I'm telling you. And whenever I travel, I like to send them postcards. So if you like to get postcards, join my street team. Speaking of social media, if you haven't been following me on social media, you've really missed out, because I just got back from Nashville. I did Creation Con in Nashville, and not only did we have a lot of fun, but there was a tornado. There was tornadoes. So we had to be down in the parking garage. So I was posting from that. So check out my TikTok or my Instagram if you want to see everything that happened. And there's I had a Nosferatu bust that went with me to all of my appearances, I think since I started this in 2021. And somebody fell in love with Nosferatu, and I just felt like it was a match. It was a match made in heaven, and I really wanted to redo my whole design for 2024 anyways. So when I saw the love that was happening between the two of them, I said, you know what? I want you to take Nosferatu, take him home. So he's now in a loving home. So if you want to see who got Nosferatu, and I'm going to guess that you probably would not be able to guess, go check out my Instagram. I'm already distracted. I have to look at my notes because I'm so excited that I forgot what all I was supposed to talk about. Oh, my next appearance is Fan Expo New Orleans. That will be January 5th through the 7th. It's not too late to make plans to come down to New Orleans. I'll be doing my vampire panel on Saturday afternoon. My favorite city in the whole world. I'll be hanging out with some amazing friends. So that will be fun. If you can't join, then you definitely need to be following me on social media to see everything I'm up to. Then I will be taking a break. Unless some like sweet opportunity comes in front of me that I have to say yes to, I am taking a planned break until May to write the 4th book. So stay tuned for information on all of that. Once the book is done and it's in the hands of the publishers, then I will be picking back up with traveling. But it definitely needs to be done by the end of April in order to get it out for May for you guys. Really, it needs to be done by March. So I plan on my first travel being Fan Expo Philly in May, but you really need to follow me to find out when the next one will be. My vampire tea, can't forget about my vampire tea. Stavros, if you're watching, I cannot thank you enough. That's something else that came out of 2023, which was my newfound love and connection to vampire tea, and I still can't believe that I'm able to talk about it every week and drink all these different vampire teas, that I have a Fang Smith now. It's just like such an awesome thing. So today's vampire tea is Stake This. For anyone that has not heard me talk about this one, this is a great like first time of the day tea or first time of the night. Whenever you rise for your time, whether it be in the night or in the daytime, this is a great tea to start out with. This is a green tea, and it has rose petals and linden blossoms and orange and lemon. I love this. It's very citrusy and it's very refreshing. And for those of you who also are not following me on social media, I don't know what you're doing, but I don't know if you can see it, but we now have a vampire bride at the top of the tree. I'll post a picture on YouTube, but really just go follow me on Instagram because you're really missing out. My familiar made me a vampire bride for the top of the tree, and I am obsessed with her. I love her so much. So I don't know, maybe I'll just leave the tree up all year. You guys need to tell me what you think I should do with my vampire tree. All right, I'm already getting distracted. We are ending this season with a bang. We are not going to do any old movie or TV show, nay. We are going to talk about the real stuff, okay? So let's go back to the real stuff, the stuff that we usually do spooky season. I already need to drink some tea. This is my Vampire Blood mug, which was a gift from Jeremy and Logan, so thank you guys. We are going to talk about psychic vampires or energy vampires. I'm going to use that term intermittently, but they mean the same thing. Also, psi vampires. That is what I tend to use. But we are talking about psi vampires. And why? Well, that's because the second half of this episode is actually an interview that I did with Wes Fisher, who wrote a screenplay called The Order of the Ka. And the link to the screenplay and any of the articles that I reference when I talk about psi vampires will be in the description of this episode, along with the link to Vampire Tea. If you have not checked that out, you have time to get some, maybe not before the holidays, but definitely by New Year's. So I did this interview with him. I don't want to give too much away, but psychic vampires play a very big part in the screenplay. So I thought, why don't we talk about that before I just throw the interview at you? So let's do that. Let's do what Lena loves to do, which is talk about the real vampire stuff. And today we are talking about psychic vampires. So also psi vampires or energy vampires. I'm going to use all of those phrases. Again, I tend to use psi vampire in my everyday life, but you can call them whatever you like. And a psychic vampire, for those of you who don't know, is a vampire who feeds off the life force or the energy of a living creature in order to maintain their own life force. So they are using energy or life force instead of blood to nourish themselves. In real life, in vampire circles, that would be called a sanguine vampire, somebody who uses blood instead of energy. So I will be talking about sanguine vampires and psi vampires. And for the purpose of this episode, we are talking mostly about psi vampires. I want to state clearly, very clearly and slowly so you understand, I am talking about vampires who gain energy, sustain themselves off of the life force or energy of another. I am not talking about people with psychological disorders who tend to drain you when they speak to you. And the thing that comes very quickly to the top of my mind would be like borderline personality disorder. If you have somebody in your life who has borderline personality disorder, then you will know what I'm talking about. These are people that interactions with them tend to leave you exhausted. That is not because they are feeding off of you. That has to do with their own mental illness and the way that they interact with other human beings in order to get what they're looking for. That is not the energy vampire I'm talking about. Along with that, we are also not talking about like those people at work that just tend to like talk your ear off. For whatever reason, they leave you feeling drained or exhausted or depressed. This is not what we are talking about. So your Aunt Judy that traps you at family parties and talks your ear off about her dogs and the TV shows she's been watching, that is not what we are talking about. Unless your Aunt Judy happens to be a psi vampire, and that's a discussion that you guys need to have on your own, but that is not what we are talking about. We are talking about true psi vampires, people who are born as, identify as psi vampires. For the purpose of this episode, we will be talking about true psychic vampirism. And so I wanted to have this for you for a frame of reference. There was an Idaho State professor who studies real vampires, and she defines a psi vampire as an individual who cannot adequately sustain their own physical, mental, or spiritual well-being without the taking of vital life force energy from other sources. When not feeding, a vampire becomes lethargic, sickly, depressed, and may suffer physically. That is what we are talking about. Now, the term itself was really made popular in the 1960s when Anton LaVey published his Satanic Bible, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. He talks about psychic vampires in that, and he talks about psychic vampires as people who find themselves weak, drained of life force, and needing to use other people's life forces in order to regain their strength. People who become wan, diseased, sickly when they are not feeding off of another's energy. But people recognized this in themselves long before that term was coined. I'm just saying that that's when the term really hit the mainstream from my own research. Many psi vampires state that they were born this way. One vampire explained that he first noticed that he drew strength from charged situations, but didn't completely understand yet that he was feeding. So, Times Square on New Year's Eve, people in high states of excitement or stress or drama or these heightened situations, he noticed that he was getting charged off of that, but wasn't fully sure yet what that meant. In 2004, a psychic vampire named Michelle Bellinger, who published the Psychic Vampire Codex, explained, among many other things, ways that vampires can feed themselves when they are not sanguine vampires. 2 months ago, actually, when I was doing all of my research, I stumbled across a YouTube video, right here on YouTube, with the vampire Jack Townsend, which you guys have heard me talk about him before. He posted a conversation that he had with Bellinger on this very topic. So if you want to hear more, and again, I want to explain, this is just a tip of the iceberg. I just want to introduce you to the idea so that when you listen to my interview with Wes, you understand kind of what we're talking about. But go check that video out. I can put the link in this if you want. In 2013, there was a Washington Post article by Monica Hess, a psychic vampire. In this article, named Scarlet, explained her condition as being like an energy deficiency. She noticed in her childhood that this was happening, where her energy was not like everybody else's, and then she awakened as a vampire in her late teens. Now, she has a willing donor like many other vampires, and whether that is a psi vampire or a sanguine vampire, it is the same thing. A vast majority of them have willing donors. But she does note that when she's in a large positive crowd, that she is able to feed. So that is always something that you can keep in the back of your mind about energy vampires, is that sometimes they are feeding off a situation without even meaning to or intending to. Now, not all psi vampires feed in crowds. Some actually draw their sustenance in the bedroom off of sexual energy. In 2016, there was a study by two ladies named Carrie I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, Carrie and Gray, and they explained that there was a subgroup of psi vampires there's a subgroup of psychic vampires, and you have to understand that with all vampires there tend to be subgroups, was the point I was trying to say, but I didn't say it very well. Anywho, amongst the psychic vampires, there is a subgroup, and this is somebody who needs sexual stimuli, either produced or evoked, in order to make the feeding be of value to them, to get a full feeding. The study explains there are a few ways to feed. So there's ambient feeding, which involves absorbing energy that surrounds people, either generated by flirtations or indirectly from excessive energy off of like patrons of a club. So if you were in like a BDSM scene, you were in a club that has consenting adults involved in sexual activity, that you can sort of feed off of the energy that's around you just by being in proximity of the donors, and that is ambient feeding. Sexual energy can also be generated remotely by phone or internet chat sessions, as some of you may know. Most of the vampires that they surveyed in this study claimed to derive sexual energy remotely. Of these, a high proportion had at least one regular donor, but it was more common for the vampire to have more than one remote donor. And as with ambient feeding, flirtations were kind of necessary in order to establish or enhance that sexual feed, and intimacy with their remote donor seemed to be necessary. So it's important that they are actually maintaining or creating and maintaining a connection with these donors. Now, contact feeding occurs when physically touching the donor, but does not necessarily involve invasive cuddling or the act itself. Cuddling, which was described as being more emotionally intense with a vampire, is a common practice for these sexual psi vampires. More vampires in the study reported using contact rather than remote feeding methods. Seems to be the one that people like the most. Unlike remote feeding, a greater proportion of contact feeders only had one regular donor for this purpose. Ambient, remote, and contact feeding are psychic vampire techniques, but in a sexual context, they usually involve a very specific donor. Then there are more intimate acts of sexual feeding, of course, the act itself. All the vampires in this study indicated that they chose their partners very carefully and were in monogamous relationships with willing donors, with a high proportion of them being married. Most participants described their relationships as protective, nurturing, and satisfying, claiming that their partners knew that they were vampires and engaged in sexual feeding. So I'm going to give you a link to that study if you want to go check out more of that. Recent studies of all vampires showed that only 17% of living vampires are sanguine vampires, that 31% feed off of energy only, and the rest of them are actually hybrids. So I thought that was interesting. Historically, there was a divide between sanguine and psi vampires. There was a lot of sort of trash talk on both sides. The psi vampires implied that sanguine vampires were beasts. The sanguine vampires implied that energy vampires were not real. So there was a lot of that back and forth. But in the last 20 years, there has been great strides, a big push for unity and allowing everyone a safe place to be themselves, which is what we all crave, right? That's part of what I do on this podcast, is trying to bring awareness to what vampires truly are as opposed to what people believe them to be. The Atlanta Vampire Alliance is a prime example of this strive for unity and understanding and becoming a safe space for everybody to truly be themselves. So I want to read this directly from their website. And again, this is the Atlanta Vampire Alliance. The mission of the AVA is to promote unity in the greater Atlanta, Georgia real vampire community while being available to the newly awakened to encourage self-awareness and responsibility. We honor the traditions of history, respect, and discretion regarding community affairs while advocating the safety and well-being of our members. Emphasizing research and support of social gatherings, we highlight the importance of education and strength of involvement as a cohesive force in our area. By taking an active role, we will serve not only ourselves, but also our community and our city. We accept members from both sanguine and psychic backgrounds from the local community. I loved that. When I read it, I was gonna try and write it in my own words, but I was like, no, I absolutely love the way that was written, and I love the mission that they are standing for. So now we have a basic understanding of Psy vampires. I would like to share with you the interview that I had with Wes. I would like you to hear him talk about his screenplay, his process, his thoughts on the topic. And like I said, there is a link to his screenplay in the description of this video. And then once you're done with the interview, please don't run away. Come back and join me, because I want to talk a little bit about my thoughts. So I will see you in a minute.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of different avenues that I can start with, but
Let's start with intro.
Okay, well, yeah. So my name is Wes Fisher. I am a writer, filmmaker, producer here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been doing it for about 13 years now, and writing is kind of my specialty. Is what I've fell in line with, mostly the screenwriting route. And for the past year, I was really looking to explore a genre that was different, had some basis in philosophy. And there was a fellow filmmaker who came to me and approached me and wanted to make a film on vampires. And I'm thinking to myself, well, everything is so Americanized. We need to, discover some new things about the vampire genre. So I did some searching and digging, and lo and behold, came across this wonderful book called The Violet Throne by Louis Marquez. And other occult books here. Wait a minute, my laptop's giving me updates. All right, yeah, and other occult works. And so I just started an 8-month process of just reading as much as I could and absorbing all that, and just coming up with a new way of exploring the vampire genre.
Yeah. Anybody who watches or listens to my podcast has heard me say about 1,000 times, why can't we have something different? Why can't we have something new? There's stuff out there, but it's few and far between. We see a lot of the same rehashings in the vampire genre. So tell us about your screenplay and your vampires.
Yeah, so my screenplay is called The Order of the Ka. Now, this is the first edition of it, which I actually kind of got a little backlash for it because I used the sigil of the Asaka, but we have a new one. We have a new edition, second print, who one of my directors actually created the cover for it. So really cool. He was actually a director, visual effects artist who worked on Troy and Gladiator. Yeah, the Order of the Asaka is basically what I put into light in the script. If you've seen films like Da Vinci Code or Angels and Demons, it kind of takes that route of mystery and philosophy and that approach. how things in our culture kind of correlate and kind of cross. I mean, all the different religions, and we're all basically trying to tell the same story, I feel. And there's all these different vampire communities who claim to be the start of specific teachings, but really they're all kind of talking about the same thing. So the Order of the Ka is really about ancient Egyptian vampires and thousands of years ago in Egypt, and how the essence of Isis is actually Asika, Ascensionism, which is like just the study of predatory spiritualism and transformation. So it's really fascinating material to work with. And the story follows a young collegiate journalist. Her name is Iris, and she stumbles across a very secretive order, which happens to be the Order of the Ka, and in Reading, Pennsylvania, of all places. Some really cool locations there, by the way. But yeah, and it's basically her dealing with how people perceive her and how people use each other, energy, because there's so much. The world is just like founded upon energy, I feel. And when you spend time with certain people, how they can either drain you or you can feel motivated by a certain group of people. I really cling to that. I actually embrace it a lot more too. And when I was growing up, I would always from afar observe certain situations or people, so I always saw myself as like an observer, you know and that's kind of, I guess, psychic vampirism is almost like that, where you're watching a certain group of people, or you're staying away from a certain situation, and you're just taking it all in. So you're just kind of like, well, you're letting that energy in, or you're taking from it, or you're giving it. So I really went with that, and you know in that script, and I'm still learning. Like, I'm still reading all kinds of stuff about the occultism and psychic vampirism and all that. So there's a lot of stuff out there. So
Yeah.
mm.
So it sounds like it's more action than horror. Would you say that's true?
I would say it's a little bit of both. I mean, because
Okay.
there's some horror elements in it, but it's more like a mystery. And like I told some of my other people that I work with in the film community, it's like if you can get people to believe in an idea, you know, I, I I think that's can be scary too. And if it's a particular idea, if you can get people to believe something, and that's why religion and any kind of certain dogma out there, it's all predicated towards that. So it's kind of what I really put into it.
Hmm. So tell me about your experience or your involvement with vampires. If we now, what the people don't know is we've talked before this. This
Yeah.
is not our first time talking, but I thought it was interesting that until this project, vampires weren't something that were really on your radar.
No, they weren't. I was on Team Werewolf for a while, and when I my first girlfriend, she was obsessed with Twilight, and I was like, Twilight. So we actually ended up going to seeing the first movie, and I'm like, oh man, this is so like teen romance driven, and the the glittery glowing vampires, like no. So I mean, I didn't like vampires in to begin with. So that's why I went more with Team Werewolf, and Underworld was another movie that kind of I took in as well. Yeah,
That's a good one.
it is good. I hope they revisit that. I would love to see another Underworld in the making. But when I started researching the vampire stuff, that's when I really started like, okay, there's something more to this. I'm gonna jump ship and become Team Vampire, because I've noticed certain things just from my upbringing, and certain things that how I view life. I was like, oh wow, this is actually kind of close. It's almost like an undiscovered gift, or like power, as they say. Um, and I think it's a lot more attractive, researching this kind of material and realizing it is so much better than like a lot of people cling to Marvel and superheroes and all that. But the more that you put into discovering this kind of stuff, you'll get something out of it. I can promise you.
Oh, yeah, listen, you're preaching to the choir. So you're talking to somebody who's loved vampires since I was 6. And,
Mm.
for a very long time, especially growing up in the South where I did, being interested in anything considered the occult or supernatural, paranormal is very much frowned upon, especially in the 80s and 90s. So it wasn't always something I was very open and honest about. Went into the medical profession, gained a doctorate in nursing practice, and have more fun and put more energy and have learned more about vampires than probably anything to do with medicine. So you definitely don't have to explain to me the appeal. What do you think it is? What do you think it is about vampires that has been popular since people were whispering in caves?
Well, quite recently, I've also delved into the zombie genre here in Pittsburgh because that's also very popular. And I told an actor of mine, Mike Ankus, who was in Day of the Dead, and he was a zombie. I said, people cling to the zombie genre because they have that predatory desire, like, to do it's the impulse. It's like the good and bad impulses of human nature. Like it's that attraction of, oh well, I can do this and be all powerful, and it's, I think there's just like an escapism there, and just an attraction to it. Because it's kind of like, so when I was reading too, there's Alan Moore is this one book, The Dark History of the Occult. He proposed that an idea of God and the devil are just constructs of our mind. They're basic duality of our, how we perceive things and our nature. So I found that kind of fascinating because when I was a kid, I was growing up in Christian school and stuff, like I went to Sunday school and I took all that in, and I felt weird. Like I would sit there and I'm like, I don't know, something's like really just not vegging or clicking. So it's not that I'm not a Christian, like, I'm religious, I guess, to that point, but I always felt there was something more to be had. And I'm glad, I think I found it because it explains a lot of the things that I've been going through and how I've just kind of interacted with people over the years. And just yeah, like whenever I go out, I'm always, I get off just, being around certain people and seeing certain friends, and like, they instill, being a filmmaker and a writer, any writer out there, you get ideas by being around people. The more people that you're around, can spark something. And that's kind of, what it's based on, really. Psychic vampirism is not evil per se. It's just, you taking the ideas and sparking something within your mind to really just create. I mean, it's about creativity, it's about spiritualism and all that. So I don't see it as a dark evil thing. So
Yeah, I think a lot of people understand the concept of, I don't like to be around that person because they just make me feel bad and they have a bad vibe. And I just felt bad in that situation. And the flip side, like I love being in New Orleans because the energy is so good, or I love being in New York City because of the energy. And I love feeding off that energy at parties and
right.
parades and things like that. So I think people can definitely recognize the idea of that sort of energy exchange. What do you think it is about energy or psi vampires that makes them stand out from just the normal empathetic human?
Well, I mean, I think, well, psychic vampirism, I think they're really, they're, I guess the vampires, they a lot of books I've read, there's like, oh well, they're hiding in silence and they're shadowed and they don't want to like speak or come out. Well, all that information is out there, so they want to make it known that they exist. I think, I work in a lot of venues that have crowds. PPG, the Roxy, and that kind of stuff, around crowds and all that energy and stuff. I think there's a certain level of care and respect within that community. I mean, that's what I see. We're just, psychic vampires are like initiators of life, and all that. So Yeah.
So what's the next step for the screenplay? I'm going to have the link to your screenplay on Amazon in the episode description for anyone who wants to go check it out. But what is your hope for the next step? Where is this headed?
Well, I mean, so what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to expand it into a book series. I do love the works of Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons, and all that. So I'm really working on expanding the details of it. I mean, when I would write books, like translating to the screenplay would always be more difficult for me. I find writing a script and then writing the book is actually easier because you can expand on all those details. Where a script, you have to be just like as concise, and just get your point across as quickly as you can. So, as I'm reading, continuing to read, I'll just, add in all the details. I'm working on a sequel to it as well, which takes place overseas in Pompeii and um, all that. So that's going to be. But from a filmmaker standpoint, I'm working on that zombie thing right now. But my goal is to start into a pre-production of it within the next 2 years. I have a lot of different resources in the indie film community, but I'd like to see this, go to places because I really feel like that there's something there. And there's a response to it. When I watched your review of the last voyage of Demeter, like I thought that was great. Like
Yeah.
you said a lot of things that I didn't really even pick up on. So
Well, thank you for that. That's very nice. Yeah, it's funny. I've said this before on the podcast, which is, and I have one of those coming up. It will have actually happened the week before this episode drops, which is revisiting movies I loved as a teenager and young adult, and now revisiting it as a critic and a vampire critic. It's tough because you don't want to break down something you love, but at the same time, I've started this train and now I'm on it. But sometimes it's hard to be critical, but I always say, like, I'm not being critical of the filmmakers or the writers. The thing I love about vampire genre is you can make it whatever you want to make it. If you want your vampires to sparkle in the sun, go for it. If you want them to be in the daylight, that's fine. If you want them to be sex gods, that's fine too. That's the joy of the vampire genre. You can do whatever you want with it. That being said, I'm going to watch it and I'm going to break it down and I'm going to talk about the world you've built, not out of disrespect, but out of respect, in that the world building is so incredible in this genre.
It is. It's very true. There was I don't know if you've seen the film. It's out right now. It's called Saltburn. Director Emerald Fennell, I think it's her name. But that Barry Kogan, I always forget how to say his last name. But when I because I review certain movies, and that's been one of the best films I've seen recently. Just from a technical standpoint, but also in terms of psychic vampirism, she almost touches on it because there's a line that Barry's character says in one point. I think he says he's a vampire, and it makes sense because of his character's trajectory through the film. By the end, I was really starting to pay attention all the more when I heard that line spoken. I'm like, oh wow, is this actually touching on some of the predatory spiritualism that I've been reading about? Because it's not really known, or I feel like it's not really been explored in the film community in terms of the vampire genre. So that got something on me. I'm like, okay, well, there's definitely something here.
I mean, there's a reason they've been popular for so long, and there's a reason that it's gone from word of mouth to books to movies to TV shows, because it is something, excuse the pun, but it's undying. And I think deep down, it's the idea of being able to safely be around danger, like kind of toy with the idea of danger, but in a safe way. I think it represents sort of our carnal desires and the things that we're always told to like keep away, but secretly we kind of want to be a part of. And so I think it's that idea of giving in to desires, giving in, not having to fret about disease or aging or finances or any of that stuff that we have to worry about as humans. It's that idea of like, there is something out there that allows us to tap into our desires, fall into temptation, and not worry. And
Hmm.
I think that's what will forever bring people back to the genre.
Yeah, I think it's a feeling too of like, it's just evolution and transformation. I think, people on a daily basis just want to feel like they grow every day and move forward. And, even in the books that I've been reading, like they say, like, and that's when people exercise, you go to the gym, it's like you feel rejuvenated. It might hurt, after a couple of days, but you still get that, energy back and you feel like, you can take on the world basically. And so, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of different techniques out there that, aid with, the energy uh, construct and everything. So, yeah.
I'm going to think about that every time I go work out now.
Yeah, it's you read this kind of stuff and it's like, wow, I'm never going to look at this the same way again,
So true. So true. So will
Yeah.
you keep tapping into the vampire culture and genre? And now what would you say, who do you think your fan base is going to be? Like, these are fans of what type of book, what type of movie, what type of vampire?
Well, I think there's definitely a growth for the genre. Because a lot of people, I see some of your vampire stuff back there with the Lost Boys and all that. And I would say if I had to put a demographic on it, anywhere from 18 to 75. It's such a wide spectrum just because like the one of the directors I work with, he's been my mentor for the past 7 years and has really gotten my mind more motivated to telling stories based in philosophy and mystery and suspense and all that. So because when I first started, I was really attracted to fantasy and coming of age stories, but more recently I've doing a lot more reading. So and this is the time of year to do it. So yeah, I would say that demographic. And there's a couple movies out there that if you read The Violet Throne, the beginning of that book actually takes you through some of the history of how the land of Egypt came to be. You can actually watch Gods of Egypt, and actually kind of touches on that with there being four like Isis, Seth, and all that, and her three children, Horus, and the two sisters, and all that, and kind of touches on that. So I think I find it fascinating. It's like Greek mythology too. Egyptology and Greek mythology are probably my two favorite. Yeah.
Good. That sounds really interesting. I'm going to put the link in the episode description. Is there anything that you want to make sure that you touch on or say before we end the interview?
I mean, I would just say, like, to any reader or filmmaker out there or vampire lover, just keep on researching, just because you come across stuff that might seem dark or, they tell you, from off the bat, like, take this material, with a keen eye because there's some dark stuff in there. And, you know, just keep your mind open to all of it, just don't take it to the extreme. Because, I mean, I guess I have. When I found out all the vampire stuff, I actually got a tattoo on my left leg, to because I believe in it so much. But
What is it? What's the tattoo?
it's an Anubis figure with the Ankh and the Horus eye. It's
Yeah.
trash polka style. So my cousin did that, and I'll be getting some other symbolic tattoos on my arm for the sequel that I'm writing. But yeah, I'm just like a lover of all that stuff now when it comes to symbology and all that. So
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. Well, now you've listened to the podcast, you know that I rate people's or the vampire sexiness and onks.
Nice. That's sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, Wes, thank you so much for doing this with me. Thanks for reaching out. I will get a copy whenever I have time. I'll have to read through it. And whenever you start producing, let me know. I can't
Yeah,
wait.
I'm same token. I'd love to read Bite Shift and
Yeah.
your work as well. I'd love to meet you at a con event sometime because I know you've been going to different places, and I don't know if you're going to the Steel City Con on the 8th or they always have the Steel City Cons here in Pittsburgh. But
I know. And actually the Lost Boys will be there, but I had already committed to Nashville.
Mm.
So I'll be in Nashville, and then I'm doing New Orleans in January. And then I will be taking a break until May because I have a fourth book to write. And
Oh,
I
yes.
can't work 2 jobs, do a podcast, do a YouTube channel, travel every month, and write a book. Something
Yep.
has to go. So
Yeah, I feel that. I feel that like with when you make a film, I mean, you're not done after you make it. You have to put it in film festivals and do all the marketing and all that. And this time of year has just been crazy the past couple months, doing all the traveling. And so I totally understand.
I know I tell people all the time, like, the writing the book was the easy part. It's the marketing.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of people make their mistake. I think the thing I hear the most from people is, hey, I also wrote a book, but it's not selling. And I always say, well, what are you doing? And if they're not getting out there and talking to people and promoting and going to events and getting on podcasts and all that stuff, then that, you got to do it. And it's tough because a lot of writers are introverts.
Yeah, it's true.
So,
Well, yeah, it's totally true. And I kind of I struggled. I'm gonna admit it. I struggled with that when I was younger. Like, I didn't really. I guess I got into the social media game a little late, but I started realizing like, hey, I have to talk about the projects that I'm doing and just constantly. If I'm not posting something on social media every day, I as a filmmaker feel like I'm failing.
yeah.
So I try to post something every day or every other day. And is what the screenplay that I wrote, is it perfect? By no means. Like, I'm gonna try to get it better. There's more drafts to be had, but being that it was, selected and published, and it's getting out there, it's a step in the right direction. So there's always room for improvement. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
That's awesome. So let's end with this. What piece of advice would you give to somebody who wants to write a screenplay?
So I would say, so I'm going to give you little tips and tricks of the trade that I learned from my director in Cleveland. So the easiest way to do it is think about your script like a piece of orchestrated music, beats and valleys. Use the 7 plot point structure. Come up with chapter titles and just print them on a piece of paper and just post them on your wall and kind of map out your story that way. I mean, you don't really need to have, I guess, the software at first. Just write. Just try to write 5 pages a day. That's what I try to do. I try to read before I go to bed. I try to write when I wake up, clear my mind and then come back to it, working on different genres. So
That's awesome. I love it. I
yeah.
love it. Well, thanks for coming on, Wes. What a good way to end. And what a good way to end. This is the season finale of 2023, the end of the 3rd season, which if you had
Wow.
told me I was gonna keep this up, I would have laughed in your face. But thank you for joining me on the season finale. Can't wait to see what 2024 brings
Yeah.
you. And definitely stay in touch and let my podcast listeners know what's going on with your work.
Yeah, I love it. Definitely will.
All
And
right, Wes.
yep.
No,
Take
go
care.
ahead. Go ahead. You were gonna say
I
something.
just wanted to say too, like, the different web series, there's a lot of fiction podcasts out there too. As I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of there's another writer that I work with who actually wrote some vampire stories, and vampiric tales can be found in a lot of fiction podcasts. So, you can listen to audiobooks and, really get inspired by some different perspectives. So there's all kinds of material out there.
Very true. And one of the best things about this podcast is stumbling across gems.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, someone tells me to watch something, and I'm like, okay. And I watch it and think, oh my gosh, where was this diamond in the rough? So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Wes, thank you so much. And
Yep.
stay in touch with the podcast listeners. Let us know updates, okay? And I will mention it on the episodes as things happen for you.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you. See ya.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
That's it. It is a wrap for 2023 and season 3 of the Beautiful Dead podcast. I cannot thank you all enough for being here with me, for supporting the podcast, the YouTube channel, all of my travels, my books, my dreams for the future. I cannot thank you enough. And if you've been here since the beginning, there are no words to thank you. I still can't believe that I'm getting emails from people all over the world. I have such exciting plans for next year. I want to do a documentary. What it will be about, I will tell you more about when you return in January. I have more guests coming on, more interviews. I want to do more of what you guys want to hear about. I am thrilled to be on this ride with you, but still want to continue to make this the vampire podcast that you would like to see or listen to. So please continue to send me messages. I don't have words. I don't have words for what this year has meant to me and the excitement that I have for next year. Please come back January 7th to see us kick off the new year and talk about everything vampire we can look forward to. In the meantime, I hope that you are surrounded by people you love, you're safe, happy, and healthy. Of course, I wish you wicked hugs and bloody kisses. Good evening.